needle plate markings on the Jazz 2 are very helpful for any project that you happen to be working on. So we're going to explore how these actually work and how best to achieve those seam allowances that you're looking for. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we are actually on that straight stitch, which is number 1. And if you're not, you'll just simply use that stitch selector dial on the right-hand side of the machine to select the straight stitch. Then we're going to use the stitch width dial to make sure that we are at a 3.5 position with our needle. We have to have that needle in that center position to use those markings on the needle plate and the bobbin cover. Next, you're going to select your stitch length, and I'm going to show a 5/8 inch seam for garments. So I'm going to have my stitch length at about 2 or a little bit past 2. The next thing that I actually use is I engage that stop needle down position, which means that that needle is going to stop in the down position no matter what I do. And the reason that I do that is I typically don't always use pins. I like to guide my fabric and adjust, and that needle just holds my fabric along with the presser foot, so I don't have to worry about anything shifting. Now let's take a closer look at these markings. On the bobbin cover, you'll notice there's a series of markings from 0 to 3/4. That's all in inches, and again, it's based off that center needle position. Then you'll see a series of markings at the back. These are also marked in inches, and they match with the markings in the front. So what that means is that if I place my fabric underneath the presser foot and I'm using 5/8, this marking will match with the back marking. The markings or numbers in the middle are in centimeters. So let's align the edge of this denim with our 5/8 inch marking at the front and place that fabric underneath the presser foot so that my needle catches it when it takes its first stitch. And I'm going to take a couple of stitches, I'm going to reverse a couple of stitches, and now I'm going to move forward. As I move forward, you will notice that your fabric at the back is lining up, or fabric edge is lining up with that 5/8 inch marking. What you want to pay attention to or always watch is the front marking. Once that fabric passes underneath the presser foot to the needle, it's stitched. We want to make sure that we're aligned here in the front. If we're aligned in the front, we'll be aligned in the back. So we're going to sew to the end of this denim piece, and at the end I am going to take a couple of reverse stitches, and then I'm going to move forward. So now let's take a look at wool. I always like to play with different fabrics because when I am sewing, I am using different fabrics. In one garment, I might have wool and denim. Again, that fabric edge aligns with that 5/8 inch marking, and I'm going to keep it aligned in the front. I think that that's the most important part because I think we naturally always want to look back here to make sure that everything's accurate. But if I set it up accurately here, I'm going to be accurate. The back is just an assurance that I am at that 5/8 inch marking. And we'll continue to sew to the end. And then I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches. And then we have cotton. And again, we'll line that up with that 5/8 inch marking. Take a couple of back stitches, and I will stitch to the end. So you can see as the loft of the fabric, meaning the denim to the wool to the cotton, it's a little easier, I think, sometimes to see that marking because that loft of that fabric doesn't in a sense get in my way, but it's just as easy on those fabrics as it is on the cotton. Now my last fabric is a chiffon fabric. And I'm going to use that same 5/8 inch seam allowance to put these two pieces or stitch these two pieces fabric together. Again, there's that 5/8 inch. I'm going to take a couple of stitches, and I'm just going to take a couple of short back stitches. And again, that fabric edge is going to be aligned along that marking on my bobbin cover plate. Now, the one thing I will do or mention is when I work with lightweight fabrics like this, I really tend not to use pins because it will run your fabric. But I always try to keep my fingers, if you've noticed, as close as I possibly can to that presser foot so that my fabric doesn't slide to the left. And I do that with denim, I do that with wool, I do that with cotton, I do that with a lot of my projects. My hands are always very close to that presser foot. And as I'm coming to the end, I'm just going to reverse. I'm going to take my needle out of my fabric, raise my presser foot, use the thread cutter, and then we're going to take a look at, there's our seam on our chiffon, on our cotton, on our wool, and then lastly on our denim. So you can see how easy it is to create the perfect seam allowance using any type of fabric and the needle plate and bobbin cover markings on your Jazz 2. Now there's another great accessory, and this is actually an optional accessory. It's called a fabric guide. And there might be times where using these markings, you might just need a little extra assurance or a little extra help. And what this is this is a guide that allows me to attach it to the machine, and then it has a sliding scale on that. And that sliding scale allows me to change my seam allowance. Maybe I wanted a larger seam allowance, more than 3/4 or 1 inch. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to align the 0 with the 0 on the bobbin cover plate. And you can use a ruler to do that, a tape measure to do that. So I'm just going to place that ruler there and say, okay, I look like I'm aligned. So now what I'm going to do is, holding onto the attachment, I need to really tighten these screws so that they are tight in place so that this attachment does not move when I am positioning my fabric or setting up my seam allowance. And again, it is an optional attachment. It was actually designed for our sergers, our serger line, a few sergers in our serger line, but it also works on the Jazz. Okay, so I'm nice and tight and in place. Now what I'm going to do is this ridge, or this edge right here, will line up with that 5/8 inch marking. So I'm going to slide that. If you can see that, it's lining up with that 5/8 inch marking, and I'm going to lock that in place. So that will hold that in place. It's not going to move on me. Now what I'm going to do when I'm stitching, rather than using those needle plate markings, I'm simply going to align the edge of my fabric with the edge of this guide, and I'm going to stitch. So here's the denim. Here's the wool. And again, the edge of the fabric is against the edge of that guide on the fabric guide. And the cotton. And you can see how easy this is, because now what I'm watching is I'm watching to always make sure that that fabric is the edge. You don't want to push that fabric because you might roll that fabric up past that guide, and then you'll actually probably have a little larger seam allowance than that 5/8 of an inch. And then lastly is the chiffon. Now there is one thing, as the fabric does leave the guide, there'll be a small portion, and we'll see that in the chiffon fabric. So as I'm nearing the end of the guide, the fabric will leave the guide. So now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch that bobbin cover marking and keep my fingers on the fabric so that it stays in position. And then reverse, needle out of the fabric, turn my cent. There's my 5/8 on the chiffon, my 5/8 on the cotton, on the wool, and then on the denim. So the Jazz 2 offers you really two great options for achieving that seam allowance that you need, whether it's for that quilt or whether you're a garment sewer or you make lots of bags or you just like to sew. Your two options are, again, the needle plate markings or the optional fabric guide.